Good morning, everybody. Francis Brady here with AFL. I am the territory sales manager for North and South Carolina, and you all are joining us on our first live broadcast today. So what we're looking to do is go through and try to get a series together where we look to answer questions that are common from our customer base. And the best way to do that is to go live, especially during these trying times, where we can reach a wide subset of customers and answer those questions in hopefully real time. So if you have any questions or comments as we go through this presentation, please be sure to enter them into the comments, and we'll look to get back to you on those answers or those specific questions. So what we're looking to do today is enter into a conversation about fiber optic connectivity. So as a territory sales manager, one question that I get asked quite frequently is, what connector is best for my solution? So that's actually a really good question. AFL is a manufacturer of many fiber optic components in the telecommunications space, and we offer connectivity solutions for mechanical connectivity, reusable mechanical connectivity. We have anaerobic style connections, which are more of your traditional puck and polish style. And then we have fuse-on solutions too, which could be either a module base or a fuse-on connector base. So we have a lot of options that we're capable of offering to our consumers. And oftentimes it's, which one do I pick? So we're going to try help alleviate that concern today by answering some of those common questions. So I'm going to bring up a document onto the screen that's going to be a termination solution guide. So what this will allow us to do is see kind of side-by-side comparison on some of the main components of what we see in the fiber optic space. So on the left-hand side of the graph, you're going to see Field Master. That's going to be an anaerobic style puck and polish connector. You're going to see a Fast Connect. That's going to be a reusable mechanical style connection. You're going to see a Fuse Connect, which will be a small, we like to say the world's smallest pigtail that you would apply using a fiber optic fusion splicer. And then we have a Polymod. That's going to be a module-based solution. So looking at these items in a little bit more detail, we actually position these products in the generation of introduction to the marketplace. So what these guys allow us to do is take a run or an installation of fiber optic cable and connectorize the end in the field, where before these came to market, we would have to rely on some type of an assembly house, some type of a manufacturing component to terminate those cables so we could plug it into our active components. So the Field Master connector would be that first generation of field applied connector solution. And it would be very labor intensive. The application of that product would be very dependent on customer skill, your polishing method, and it would take quite a bit of time in efforts to terminate one. Essentially, you would prep a fiber, you would put that fiber through the fiber optic ferrule, you would use some type of a scribe component to score that glass, you would pluck it, and then you would spend about 5 to 7 minutes polishing that in a figure eight style on some form of lapping paper. And it was very, very labor intensive. And if you're anything like myself, as you start to do 12, 24, or heck, even 144 of those during a day, your polishing style would become somewhat less figure eight style and more of like a C, and you would get an uneven polish on that connector. As a result, you could see some variation in the insertion loss and the reflectance on that connector, and essentially cause issues inside your network. That component, while very, very inexpensive, the labor and the training that's associated with the termination of that component could oftentimes be problematic. So we took that idea of managing a field applied connector and said, how can we make this easier? And we introduced a product called a Fast Connect. That would be generation 2 of fiber optic connectivity in the field. And what we did was pre-polish that ferrule in a factory and implemented a fiber optic stub inside the connector, where all you have to do is take in your incoming cable, you would strip, prep, clean, cleave that cable, and then insert it into the connector, and with the use of a wedge-based technology, terminate that connection in about 30 seconds, which was much, much faster than what you would see from a traditional anaerobic style connection. And because we were able to polish that in the field, or sorry, in the manufacturing area, we were able to increase the performance of the insertion loss and the reflectance of that connector. And probably one of the best things from a tooling standpoint, all you need is a precision cleaver. We just want to make sure that that cleave angle is nice on that fiber that's coming in. So it allows us to terminate connections fairly quickly and allow us to get into more jobs, spend less time in our jobs, and be able to bring more jobs into us as a component, as a contractor. So looking beyond that, then we introduce Fuse-On connectivity. So this is probably going to be our best performing technology. It's going to offer us the best insertion loss. It's going to offer us the best reflectance because we're taking away that mechanical component. So if we think of two fibers coming in a mechanical connection and butting together, we still have that area of separation inside of those connectors. A Fuse-On connectivity product will take those two ends of fiber and then make them one, which allows us to have a full transmission of light without any issues of separation, air gaps, cleave concerns, things along those lines. So we actually have two different options that we can pick here. One is going to be a Fuse-On connector. Like I said, probably the world's smallest pigtail. We would actually take that in a package, put it directly into our fusion splicer, and then take our incoming cable. We would prep one side of that cable and also add that into our fusion splicer. And then the fusion splicer would put those two pieces of glass together, and we would build the connector around that Fuse-On point. So a couple of benefits there. It allows us to only prep one incoming side of cable. It's going to give us the most, the best performing option for insertion and reflectance. And it's also going to be the most robust style of connection that we can offer, meaning I'm not going to worry about those two fiber optic components separating over time. It's going to be most like what we'd find produced from a manufacturer. The other option is going to be a polymod. This is going to be more like your pigtail splicing. It's going to allow us to splice inside a module, keep things very nice, very organized inside of a module piece. So there's some benefits here. If I'm working with a lot of fiber, and we all know as we start seeing the drive of the Internet of Things, the bandwidth consumption, that fiber growth is a real thing. So we've taken areas where we're looking at low fiber counts inside of a network, and we're seeing networks with over 288 connections inside of a 4RU panel. Well, in efforts to manage that, putting that inside of a module increases that ability to manage that network. It's more organized. It gives us a more streamlined approach. And if you look over on the left side of this document, that is a fully kitted polymod option with 24 connections. So for example, if we put that inside of a 4RU, we would be able to see 12 of those modules inside of a 4RU space and be able to terminate 288 connections, with most of the pigtails contained inside of the module, where the yellow cable coming out of the back would be a little bit easier for us to label or process if we had to get back into that panel at a later date. So as we start seeing the benefits here, we look at what type of networks these guys would perform well in. So what I usually tell folks is when we start looking at the differences in the capabilities, especially in terms of insertion loss, reflectance, and equipment that's needed, we start really driving into the areas of focus. So I would recommend folks utilizing Fuse-On connectivity as we start looking into those critical network places, where if a failure occurs, we would have some issues arise. May that be a hospital system, a paging system, 911 centers, things along those lines, where my Fast Connect would work very well in campus style environments, even fiber to the home. Those areas where if the line goes down, I have a little time before I have to correct it, or it's less critical for me. And then our Field Master connectors would be those areas where if I have the time, the labor that I can use to put onto a job, and I'm looking to save some cost, we have those options also. So as we start really diving into our components here, I'm going to actually give some hand samples of what we're looking at. I'm going to take this back here. And again, bear with me. This is our first live experience, so we're still looking to navigate some of these abilities on side of this network here. So if I take a look at some of the options that we have, talking through kind of the basic build out, this item here is going to be our anaerobic style connector. So this will be an LC connection. It's going to be a small form factor connection. And what we notice on this is going to be a crimp sleeve off the back, a 900 micron tail, and then our connector here. So in order to terminate this connector, we would be prepping this piece of fiber. We'd be exposing that glass all the way through the ferrule, which is the end piece on the connection here. We would be using some form of hand scribe in order to score that connection. And then we take a piece of polishing paper and we'd sit and do this in a figure-8 fashion for 7 minutes or so. And so after that's done, we'd have to inspect this. We'd have to make sure that our polish looks good. We would have to make sure that we don't have a buildup of epoxy and that it would actually be good to put into our network. As we work with single mode fiber, we're looking at an 8.3 to 9 micron core of that optic. And if we think of this like plumbing, for example, we would have an area where if we blocked that pipe or that drain, we would have an issue where light couldn't get through. So as we look at the polishing aspect, that's very, very important. If we have issues when we come to polishing and we inspect this, we could oftentimes see where it wouldn't pass an inspection. We would have to essentially cut that connector off, start fresh, and then spend another 5 to 7 minutes terminating the connector. So if we have a lot of connections that we're going to be working with that day, we could have issues long-term with the speed or the time on job going over budget, things along those lines, even though the cost of the component is relatively small. So next, we look at our mechanical connection. This is going to be an LC format that we call a fast connector. So as I showed in the Termination Expert Guide, this is going to be mechanical driven. The only tool that we would need with this is a fiber optic cleaver. So I would come in and I would prep my fiber optic cable. This is going to be an OM3 cable. I would use a form of hand stripper to clear my jacket. I would clean that component and then I would put it in a precision cleaver. And then I would take the connector out of a small package like this, which comes in a pack of 6 or a pack of 100, and then terminate it. I don't have to have any extra tools. I don't have to have any kind of camming kit or anything along those lines. All I do is prep the fiber and then I'm good to go. So I took the boot off of this guy. You're going to see this wedge that's on the connection, and I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to push that together, and that releases my fiber optic. And this is going to be fairly difficult to see on the camera. I'm going to try to put it against a black background where you might be able to see that fiber there. So we're working with about 10 millimeters of fiber. So as I prep this thing and I go and bring my connector back into the mix to terminate it, all I'm going to do is put that in to the connection until I see a nice little bow on the fiber and then squeeze the wedge. And boom, we have a termination right there, that fast. I mean, we're looking about 30 seconds on this, and the training is relatively low. I'm going to really focus on teaching somebody how to strip the fiber optic cable, and then the termination aspect is fairly easy. So you'll notice here, I didn't put the boot back onto this connector. That seems to be a problem that folks will run into a couple of times inside of their environment. And the good thing about these connections here is if that problem occurs, I can use this small wedge component and re-terminate this guy 3 to 5 times. That's really impressive, 3 to 5 times. So if I don't have something that's testing out properly, I can redo the termination 3 to 5 times. If I forgot to put a boot on, I can redo the termination 3 to 5 times. Whereas if I took my anaerobic connection here and forgot to put the boot on, like what we see here, I would have to cut this off because I couldn't feasibly go to the other end of my cable run and thread that boot back through my optical network, right? So in order to really terminate this thing properly, we would cut this and then have to re-terminate it, missing out on a component and then adding another couple of minutes, hoping that we test it out right. So this one would come from the factory. We would go ahead and do the pre-polish piece. So we wouldn't have to worry about polishing that in the field. We would hit it with some form of a one-click cleaner or cleaning item and then plug it right into the network, and we should be good to go. Some of the ingenuity behind this, if we look at the actual wedge-based system, this ships on every single connector already applied. But if you look at the top, we see a couple of clear windows on that wedge. So we can actually utilize a visual red light when terminating this in order to see a true continuity check before we even terminate. So it's an added benefit in order to make the installation very easy and the installation very fast for our contractors. And then looking at the next piece, we start looking at our Splice On component. So what I have here is a small SC Fusion Splice component. So those guys ship in a package that looks like this. Same 6 components that will go inside of it. We'll have 4 components total. You'll have a ferrule component, which will be here in this small fiber holder. You're going to have the connector housing. You'll have the splice sleeve, and then you're going to have the boot component. So you essentially have everything that you need with the exception of a fusion splicer to build these guys. So these will be compatible all the way back to the Fujikura 40 series, and you have many generations of fusion splicing options that will be available to work with these. So core alignment, cladding alignment, fixed V-groove, you can utilize those in all the Fujikura splicers. So as I look at this component, I have a small boot coming off the back. I just have a small stub of 900 micron here for the example's sake, but this is a really nice example. The way that these guys are operated or constructed is the boot still offers that important piece of the flexibility at the end of the connection. What we do is use a small splice sleeve, which ends right here and hides underneath the component of the connector, which is excellent. So our boot still operates as a strain relief mechanism rather than having a large splice sleeve that comes out to the end to where the boot is and then offering some type of pinch point at the end of our fiber. So our component is very much protected underneath the housing of that connector, which is great. Another benefit here. So with everything from the splice sleeve underneath the connection, I don't have to worry about using splice trays inside of my panels, right? So I'm taking that cost and I'm putting it away. All right, I don't have to worry about having a splice sleeve 11 inches down my pigtail and worrying about that guy being protected or what. I can break out my cable, use 11-inch strands on my tight buffered and terminate my connector right on the end of it. So I'm saving all of these components in the long term, right? I have the splice sleeve underneath the connection, and it gives me a very nice, clean approach into terminating my fiber optic panel. Another thing that's really nice about these, and I'm going to take one out of the package and let you all see it, is the fact that we send them preloaded on a fiber holder. Now that might not seem like a very big deal, but it really is. So when I take this out of the package, okay, what I have here is a ferrule component and a piece of fiber that's already cleaved and already polished from the factory. Or sorry, already cleaved and already prepped from the factory. It ships in a clean container. So I prep one side of my incoming cable and I take this component out and I put it in my splicer and then I'm off to the races. Okay, I'm able to build that connector around that component and I don't have to do anything to this incoming side. I don't have to take it out of a package, load it into another fiber holder and then worry about that position inside of my splicer. I have all of that here. Right? So that's a very, very big deal. This is a disposable piece that comes on all of the ferrules that will be inside the Fuse Connects, and it's paired to work with a Fujikura machine. So I have the ability to just take this guy, load it into my splicer, and then splice and be able to go on and on and on and terminate those connections very, very quickly, very, very efficiently without having to worry about that transition of putting a exposed fiber optic into some type of fiber holder and risk damaging it, for example. Which would make that connector useless, right? So that's a pretty good thing to point out. And then as we go into our last option, we're looking at a module base. So what I have in front of me is a 24-port angled LC polymod. And I left this one unterminated for a reason, so you can see how this looks. So as we look at this polymod here, 24 fibers inside of a module is a lot to manage. All right, so I've actually got about 3 meters of ribbon cable inside of this. So you can see how nice that operates and how nice that it routes inside the module. So this gives me a very, very clean approach when I have those high density panels that I have to work with. And then on the front, we've got the 24 port on the connections. So what I do is take this out and I'm working pigtail to pigtail. And unique to the Polymod is I don't have to splice inside of this module. Okay, I'm actually taking my adapter plate with the pigtails on the table and splicing fiber to fiber. And then once everything's spliced, I connect it to the module piece and then route my fiber inside with the fiber optic stub coming out the back. So a couple of benefits here. I have a cleaner panel. I have a more organized panel. If you're working in high density networks or maybe a meet me spot where I've got different cable routes going to different locations, I have the ability to manage that effectively without some form of a rat's nest behind my panel. So I can label these ports, these adapter plates, for what directions they're going, maybe what customers they might be going to if I'm a service provider, something along those lines. I also have the ability to have a very clean background inside of the panel space. If we look at a lot of 900 micron loose fibers at a 144 count or 288 count, that could be a lot of very fragile glass that's in the back of the panel. And if I have to go and solve an issue on one connector port, that might cause issues down the line. If I have the ability to manage that more effectively, make that look a little bit more clean, I can troubleshoot one module, right? I could put a VFL on this guy and see if I have an issue inside the module, right? We make a nice clear cover here. So if there's an issue with a macro micro bend in the module or maybe a poor splice or something along those lines, I can take that and see it without having to worry about taking this module apart and exposing all that fiber. That nice clear cover allows me to see that problem zone. And then anything behind that would be cable that's in some form of a subunit or in some form of a cable jacket, which the risk of damage is much lower. It's a more robust product set. So all in all, those are going through some of our high-level connectivity solutions. Again, looking to answer that basic question of what connectivity solution would be best for my network. The real answer there is you can't go wrong. AFL manages and provides to our customer base so many options that the choice is really up to you. What I would recommend is if you were working with some form of a critical network, that you would look to a Fuse-On technology that's more robust. Okay, you can always reach out to us directly. We have the ability to be contacted through our website, our social media platforms, which you all are viewing on here. We have tools on our website that can get you to our sales team, a very robust inside sales team. So we have the ability to manage any of those questions that you might see. And I definitely appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to join me and go through these solutions that we have to offer. If you have any questions, please drop them into the comments. We'll be sure to get back to you. And thank you so much for joining.